Origin of virtue and beauty. Virtue and beauty are the source of all living things in the universe. The gravity of yin forms spirochete. The attractive force between yin and yun leads to the mercy core. The mercy core generates virtue and beauty. The mercy core generates virtue and beauty. Virtue and beauty have positive and negative poles, which are in the yin and yang. Virtue belongs to yin. Beauty belongs to yang. Virtue prefers motionless. Beauty prefers motion. Virtue is intangible. Beauty is tangible. Virtue is in the heart. Beauty pleases the eyes. Virtue is the cause. Beauty is the effect. Virtue is touching. Beauty is attractive. Virtue is priceless. Beauty can be priced. Virtue is constant. Beauty is changing. Virtue is eternal. Beauty has its time. Virtue generates all things. Beauty forms all things. Virtue has no life or death. Matter has life and death. Fate has life and death. Things have life and death. Luck has life and death. Man has life and death. Virtue is the master of the universe. Beauty is the mass of the universe. Virtue generates all things. All things have their forms. All things have their beauty. All things have their birth. All things have their growth. All things have their youth. All things have their old age. All things have their remaining years. All things have their decline. All things have their death. All things have their intangible bodies. The tangible body is the reality of all things. The reality of all things has its own beauty. This is the dynamic beauty of all things. This is the growth beauty of all things. This is the fate beauty of all things. Form dies in beauty. Virtue lasts with all things. Virtue is consistent. With virtue, all lives multiply. With virtue, all things last for a long time. With virtue, all things have good quality. With virtue, all lives enjoy health. With virtue, all things succeed. With virtue, all fate is lucky. Without virtue, all things are low and bad. Without virtue, all lives suffer disease. Without virtue, all things encounter setbacks. Without virtue, all fate is disastrous. Virtue is the ancestral lineage. Virtue is the self-cultivation. Virtue is the pile of good deeds. Virtue is the gathering of fate. Virtue is the return of merits. Virtue is the amalgamation of mercy. Virtue praises kindness. Virtue sings songs for love. Virtue bestows beauty. Virtue attracts virtue. The universe is vast for virtue. The earth is nourishing for virtue. The sun is hot for virtue. The moon is bright for virtue. Stars shine for virtue. Strong winds blow for virtue. Heavy rain cries for virtue. Thunder and lightning roar for virtue. High mountains tower for virtue. Rivers flow for virtue. The lakes and the sea are deep for virtue. Spring is warm for virtue. Summer is hot for virtue. Autumn is cool for virtue. Winter is cold for virtue. Animals are happy for virtue. Plants smile for virtue. Minerals glisten for virtue. Life is kind and loving for virtue. All things in the universe are born in virtue. All things in the universe die in virtue. Virtue is the mother of all things. Virtue is the blessings of all things. Virtue prepares for all things. Virtue is busy for all things. Virtue hurts for all fate. To accumulate virtue is to reserve wealth. To accumulate virtue is to reserve blessings. To accumulate virtue is to reserve luck. With virtue, all things have good quality. With virtue, all lives are blessed. With virtue, all things have good luck. Great virtue is like water, drop by drop, forming streams, rivers, pools, ponds, lakes, rushing into rivers, converging into the sea. Virtue is like the sea, as immense as the East China Sea, stretching for miles and nourishing all generations. With water, plants grow green branches and beautiful flowers. With water, animals grow fat and strong bodies. With water, minerals glisten. With water, human beings enjoy good health and spiritual comfort. Little virtue is like wind, thread by thread, forming gusts, gales, smoke, condensed into mountains, flying in the forests, blowing away all things, all auspicious clouds, all good luck. The plants are blown to broken branches and scattered flowers. The animals are blown to starvation and cold. Minerals are blown into dust covering the sky. Human beings are blown to misfortune. To accumulate virtue is to prolong life. To accumulate virtue is to increase wisdom. To accumulate virtue is to attract good luck. To accumulate virtue is to invite blessings. One can be without talent, but not without virtue. One can be without money, but not be wicked. One can be without power, but not without virtue. One can be without fame, but not without virtue. One can be without learning, but not without virtue. Without virtue is like the earth without the sun. Without virtue is like the earth without the sea. Virtue governs the world. Virtue nurtures all things. Virtue benefits the 5 continents. Virtue breeds the 4 seas and the whole world. Virtue beautifies the whole world.